Today's topic is a heavy one. It's one that has put this country, Kenya, to shame across the world for the amount, the sheer number of deaths that have come out of a place called Shakahola in Kilifi County in the coast.
How did we not realize this? When we were rescuing some of them, they were saying this was prophesized. Some of them still want to continue fasting.
You know, they're trying to push this narrative that nothing will happen to Mackenzie.
The biggest question is, what do you charge Mackenzie with?
We're back for another episode of The Big Picture, and today's topic is a heavy one. It is a national tragedy, it is a national shame, but it's also the subject of numerous questions. How could this have happened? Under the noses of administration, of families, of friends, how could it all have happened? And how is it that that number of people could have gone missing without anybody taking notice? One of the people who's been on the ground in Shakahola from day one, up until I think fairly recently when there have been restrictions around who can access those areas, has been Hussein Khalid from HAKI Africa, Executive Director of HAKI Africa, friend to Africa Uncensored, of course. And it's a heavy topic, Hussein. And I want to get into that shortly, but we've also got in studio, as usual, one of our fact checkers from Piga Firimbi, Tracy Bonareri, is here today. Tracy, I'm sorry that the topic's kind of heavy, right? So we're not going to see much of that smile of yours today. But nonetheless, I'm sure you've got an important fact check for us.
Yes.
Yeah. What are you looking at?
Images. Mm-hmm. So the current regime has been known for being pro-religion, right? And so now people doctored certain images placing the Pastor Paul Mackenzie with either Rachel Ruto, Rigathi Gachagua, or the president. So that's what we'll be looking into today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Looking forward to seeing that. So Khalid, have you? I asked this of you when we were talking about River Yala.
Yeah.
Up until that point, we hadn't seen that scale, that number of bodies coming out of the earth, coming out of the water in this country.
Yeah.
How does it make you feel just 2 years down the road to be at another scene, except the scale is 10 times larger than River Yala?
Extremely disappointed. Saddened, definitely, particularly as you've correctly put it, the numbers that are coming out of this entire saga. We feel let down, particularly by government and government authorities. But also there's that sense of guilt, even as a human rights organization that is primarily based at the coast and with our headquarters just in a neighboring county, Mombasa. Even us, we're asking ourselves, how did we not, realize this? Fine, when we came to realize about it, we alerted the whole world to this fact. But still, we're asking ourselves, why didn't we notice this sooner? And we've been to the ground and we've seen those mass graves. The horrors, they remain, in one's memories for quite a while. You've just said it. I left there a couple of days ago, and it was purely because of the feeling of how and why did this happen, that makes you feel like you really, as a country, we've let these people down. We've really let them down. Hundreds, and it's really disappointing. Hundreds,
and many of them young children. It's tough to go to this place, but I want to ask anyway, what for you has been the absolute worst thing about this entire affair, perhaps that you've witnessed or that you've come to know about the mass graves in Shakahola and those killings?
I would say by far, and I've done, human rights work in this country, and I've come across numerous cases with very diverse setups. But for me, what is really captivating or sad is the fact that minors, in one of the graves, the pathologists were telling us one of the bodies found was a child of between 4 to 6 months.
Also starved to death.
To imagine what that child must have gone through to meet its death. How much that child must have cried, and a parent who is there and just witnessing and seeing that. I remember one of the graves, there were 5 children, and they were buried, head, legs next to each other. To imagine what these children went through, it's just something you really can't. One of our staff, I remember a few days after seeing all this, couldn't sleep at night alone. We had to ferry his family to come to Malindi, where we were spending the nights, because he couldn't sleep alone. He said he kept seeing his children and imagining they're in that situation. So we had to tell him, your children are okay, you're fine, do you want to go back? And he felt if he left that site, he would be letting down his children, because he's also doing this because he didn't feel what happened was right. Yeah. So for me, the fact that adults, put children, innocent children, through all this. In one interview I was doing with a different media house, and there was another person who was also being interviewed. And he said that he was looking for his child, and he was told that this child is in this place, And he traveled to that place. He forced his way in. Of course, they stopped him initially, and he said, I'm not leaving until I get my child. And when he went in, he said what he saw. The way in Africa or in Kenya we put thorn fence around cattle so that at night they don't go. He said he went in, and it was around 2-3 in the afternoon, and he saw children in that boma, and they looked like they had been there for days and nights, because they were crying. Even the sounds from these children were so faint, like they had been put there daytime, and at that time we were like at the peak of the drought. At night with the cold, and they were like, he said at most they must have been there 2-3 days continuous, starving, crying, and they couldn't go anywhere. They had huddled themselves in one corner, and people were just watching around.
What do we know about not just the perpetrators, because I think some of them were willing participants, they were believers, etc. But the people who were burying the bodies, are they the same people? Is it a different set of people? Who was responsible for the proliferation of all of these mass graves, at least as far as we know?
So from what we know, we have engaged with some of the survivors, and we've asked them questions and why they were doing this. And I can confirm to you, even those that have been rescued right now, some of them still want to continue fasting. Even at this point in time when they're out of there. When we were rescuing some of them, they were saying this was prophesied, that people will come to stop us from ascending to heaven. These will be sons of the devil and daughters of the devil who will stop you, who will not want you to go to heaven. So they're saying this was prophesied. We were told that you people will come to stop us from ascending to heaven. So that is the status of their minds right now as we speak. They still believe that the world is coming to an end and that they were supposed to be saved. So we know that there was Mackenzie was the chief priest. There were priests under him, and then they also had what they called wateule, or mteule and wateule. And these were people who were guarding the process to the end. So, we were told that when you're fasting, when you're almost dying, you can easily change your mind. You can just decide, no, I've had enough, I can't do this. So this wateule would be put to guard you, to help you cross to heaven. So they had different setups. They had security men when we first went to that place in search of this boy, we were met by a group of guys who did not allow anyone to go in. Yeah. So they had everything properly set up. It was a community. They had their own leader. They had deputy leaders. They had officers. They had soldiers, They had weapons. So
what kind of weapons?
Crude weapons. They had pangas, machetes. Our officer who went with the first team to rescue the boy was actually hit by a panga, So it wasn't like, just something that happened by accident. This is something that was planned. This is something that had been organized, and they had everything in place to ensure whatever they were doing actually, saw the light of the day.
Khalid, that kind of organization, to have Wateule on the ground who are guarding people and have people above them and people above them, and finally the person at the top of the pyramid takes a lot of planning. But I'm more interested in parallels here that you might have witnessed from your work previously in, looking at people who've come out of extremist situations, extremist groups, and thinking about the kind of indoctrination that those kinds of people, or rather those people, might have gone through. Do you see any parallels, or is this something that is just a completely different beast?
No, for me, as you've put it, we've been dealing with ideologies, countering violent extremism, religiously motivated violence in communities. And to some extent, when individuals commit suicide, for example, a suicide bomber, usually you've made a decision as an individual that this life has no value anymore, and whatever I'm doing is going to take me to heaven, that there's a better life out there, and that, my time here on earth is done, and I'm better off using my end as a bridge to the next better life. That is always the thinking. And it's usually informed by religious understandings. If someone has made you believe that if you do this, you're actually doing it in the name of God and everything.
Yeah.
And listening to the survivors, they're saying this is not suicide. We are fasting. We're dying in worship. We are actually practicing our faith and giving ourselves to our faith. So for them, it's very clear also that, Mackenzie, as you must have heard, many people were told to sell off their properties, get the money, bring it to him so that he can save as many people as possible with the money that he receives. So the idea was, there is no meaning in this world anymore. This is a world of suffering. And in any case, it's coming to an end very soon. And here's an opportunity you've been given to cross to the next life in a better way so that you can have a good life wherever you're going. Yeah. So the parallels are very clear. The general message is the same. It could be that the strategy is different because here you're fasting to death, and maybe in another place you're bombing or you're blowing yourself. But it's more or less the same strategy.
It's the same kind of indoctrination.
Exactly. It's the same kind of indoctrination, using religion to convince someone to end their lives so that they can then go to a better life than where they are today.
Because it's located in Shakahola and in Kilifi, which is one of the poorest counties in the country, one can very quickly make the assumption that then, they are targeted because they're poor or desperate. But we've heard at least some stories of people who don't come from poor or underprivileged backgrounds, who are part of the people who are fasting, or even, unfortunately, part of the people who died. Yeah. It's much more than that. It seems to be like a state of mind, a state of consciousness that can be taken advantage of. But again, just looking back into your years of experience dealing with people who've been in violent extremism, and now speaking directly to those who have been taken out of the church, what's the state of mind of some of these people? We found them at the end. Have you been able to talk with some long enough to figure out where they were at the beginning of this process? Yeah.
The state of mind presently is that they have that conviction, and they truly believe that what they're doing is right. There is no doubt in their mind that, this is a clear pathway to heaven. This is the right way. Whatever we are doing, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. So they believe in that. To an extent, I remember one individual, we tried to give them medicine because they were not feeling well. And they took the medicine, looked at it, and threw it away.
Even as they're not feeling well.
Even as they're not feeling well. Even as, they've been rescued, they've been removed from that place. We are hosting them in some place, and they do want to take medicine. And one of them said, look, I'm an adult male. When we went now to rescue them from the house, he was completely weak, couldn't even walk. He said, when he was lying down, I'm an adult male. I am conscious. I know what I'm doing. Please leave me alone. Don't take me away from my home. I know what I am doing. It may not be right to you, but this is my freedom of worship. You cannot, interfere with my rights. And this is someone who is speaking to you, and you can tell this is not just a village person, someone intelligent who understands his rights, who understands what's happening, but has that conviction that, I am doing this, and this is the right way for me to go. We initially even asked when we began, because it's a remote place, 50, 60 kilometers from the nearest town, Malindi. And even when you come off the main road, you have to go deep inside the forest to get to where, these places were. And so initially we also felt this guy is preying on, people who are poverty-stricken, rural folks and stuff like that. But later on, when, now news was coming out of who has been there. You have families from Kisii, people who are educated. You have people from Kisumu. You have people from, Nairobi. You have people from different parts of the country. And they all went there. So it wasn't like these are just people from Kilifi. As we know, Kilifi is one of those counties when there is drought, people actually just die. Poverty levels are very high. It's one of the poorest. We have Bamba area, one of the remotest and poorest parts of Kenya. But that was not those were not the only victims. We had good numbers. So the question that everyone is asking, how did he manage to convince an individual like an air hostess, someone who's seen the world, someone who, is well educated, informed about what's happening across the world, to sell off their property, to give all that she had to him, and then up to this point in time has not been seen, which means there's a high probability one of those bodies belongs to her. We don't know. But that's a very, very big question. And what we are asking ourselves is, where was the state? Where was the state when all this was happening? We have chiefs, assistant chiefs, we have wazee wa mitaa, we have community policing, we have nyumba kumi. Every 10 houses, we are supposed to know what is happening. This, infrastructure, this system, where was it in Shakahola? 200 plus bodies.
It seemed to have been almost completely secluded or either collapsed in that area, because one of the first interviews of, the relative of a victim was detailing his search for his loved one, for his daughter, his son-in-law. And I've had occasion to speak with, members of that family, and they had searched for weeks. They had talked to the authorities for weeks, possibly even months. What does this tell you about the reaction time of our local administration when it comes to things like these? Even if it doesn't seem like it might be a major crime, it could be one person missing. But this obviously should, give us all pause for thought, shouldn't it?
2 points for me. One is that in Kenya, unless you are a person of substance, if I may call it that, then the authorities don't take your cases seriously. I'm sure if the person who had gone there to report a missing daughter or son-in-law or family was a politician or a wealthy person within the community, I believe more action would have been taken. But because it was just a local teacher, because the old man you're referring to is a local teacher. The daughter is just, another woman within the community. The son-in-law was a GSU personnel. The police didn't pay much attention. The other issue that comes to mind are stereotypes. In that community, the police tell us there's a lot of competition between churches for worshippers, for faithfuls and all that. So they said, we always get these cases. This church is accusing this church of, maligning this other one, trying to mudsling and stuff like that. So for them, these are things that are reported every day. Some guy from a different church, or maybe he's been chased. Yeah. Now he comes and says, these people are doing this and this and this, and for no other reason. But, they feel jealous or something like that. So when this matter was reported to them, when our officer went to report with this old man, in fact, they told HAKI Africa, don't disturb yourselves with these things. These are, people who are just want to, spoil each other's names.
They said that to your officer?
Yes, to our officer.
Okay.
But then, listening to the old man and understanding where he's from, and, we were not satisfied. So it's at that point then he said, can I go? Can we just escort this man? I was like, how sure are you it's safe? Like, no. From what we hear, they starve people to death. They don't kill people. They don't. Are you sure? So we agreed, get a few more men, and then, okay, let's go see what happens. So that is when now they went for the first time, and the old man was adamant, I'm not living here without my son. You must give me that child. And it's at that point now when we got the child, now to report to the police, they realized, okay, this is not just...
bigger than they thought.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of speculation, misinformation about the state of the bodies. I know you've been there and you witnessed some of them coming out of these mass graves. And it's difficult to tell just by looking at the bodies. But there's a new allegation that's arising that some of these bodies may not have been, buried there as a consequence of being members of Pastor Mackenzie's church. How much credence do you give those kinds of allegations?
Well, first we must ask ourselves why the state decided at a later point to block journalists and human rights personnel, one on the site and two during the post-mortem exercise.
So even human rights personnel have been banned from witnessing the post-mortem
the last post-mortem that was done for 110 bodies, they were all state institutions that witnessed the post-mortem. And for us, that raises many, many, many questions. Why would they do that? What we know from this cult, their followers and everything, is that people would fast, and they actually even had days. They would say the kids would last for 6 days, then they would die. I don't know, the women would go for how many days, and then the men. So they had that. But so far, we've not heard of any case where an individual was strangled, an individual was maybe suffocated, or even beaten to death. But we know from the post-mortem results that the state gave out that some were strangled, some were suffocated, nose and mouth probably covered until they died, and some died out of blunt trauma. So the question then is, are these victims of the same cult? And what could have happened for them to choose to then kill these ones differently? Or are they victims of other cases in other areas, but then brought to be buried there? So even before we question why the government blocked, even from their own findings, it raises concerns.
There seem to be some inconsistencies.
Yes, are these victims of the cult, or are these persons who are brought from somewhere else? Because I know at some point we noticed police even stopped shooting. There were allegations that they were using ropes to kill suspects. The strangulation has come up. Last year, we did a few cases where, police were alleged to have killed people other than bullets, So it's out there. And, now the task force, the judicial inquiry, they must question if this cult, they're saying their victims starved to death or fasted to death, then where are these other bodies coming from?
Yeah.
Could it be that they are still responsible for these ones too? Or are these bodies from other places brought and buried in that area?
Was there an end date? When you speak to the people who starved themselves, was there a date they have in mind? Usually these cults have a specific date. What was that date and why was it significant?
June 2023. I'm not sure why June 2023, but we've asked all of them. So the plan was the kids would go first, followed by women and then men. That's why the majority, I think around 60% of the bodies are children. Yeah, and then after that you have women and then some men. Mackenzie's death was supposed to be sometime in August, which we also don't understand, because if the world is coming to an end in June,
how does he die after the world ends?
How does he die in August? So those are questions that people are still asking, but obviously Mackenzie is out of reach, and we can't get answers from him. But what we know is that there was an end date, and that was in June 2023, and he was trying to save as many as possible before that date so that they can ascend to heaven. And there's a question you asked, who was burying these bodies? From what we heard from the survivors was that when a person died, they would call it harusi. They would say, kuna harusi, there's a wedding. And the burial would be done communally. It's not one person or two people or three. They would do it communally. And they would go there and they would say, now this person is free from the shackles of this world. He is now enjoying himself. He's in a better place. He's now such that those that are left behind are wondering, when is my day going to come? I also want to be in that position, to be in heaven with the Lord and all this. So that somehow motivated them to also follow in that direction.
Khalid, as a human rights activist for many years, you've seen both the dangers of indoctrination, but also the overreaction to that kind of indoctrination. We're talking here about, extremism, indoctrination towards violent extremism. But this, as we've talked about, is similar. Where is the line? Because a lot of people are now asking themselves, where is the line between freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and the safety and security of the person, the safety and security of the community? Where is that line? And how do you defend that line when things are in such a unclear and blurry state?
It's a very good question. A very good but very tough question. Because the line is extremely, extremely thin. It's very, very hazy. You can't really tell it starts here and ends here, because these are several rights that are clashing. A few days after this guy we rescued and he was saying, this is my right, you're infringing on my right, I started asking myself, was he right? If I so choose to practice my religion, and in doing so, or in the process, I meet my death. People would die, everyone will die, one way or the other, So then, are we right to stop them from worshiping? What makes us think that we are right and they are wrong? This is just, a matter of perception. At what point do you now say, this is extreme? Yes, you have your religion, but it must end here. And who has that right to curtail that religion, freedom of religion, to say this is where it stops? So what I can just, conclude is that if a practice of a right extends to harm, either of self or of any other person,
Yeah.
then one can argue that is where now the right stops. But then you ask yourself, what is harm? If Muslims fast from dawn to dusk, at what point do you say this is enough? Maybe for a child at lunchtime, they've already been, pushed to the wall. Maybe at that point they need to eat. But we allow Muslims to fast till dusk. Yeah? So at what point and how do you define harm? Is harm death? Is harm, near death? If I say I'm going to fast up to, just before my death, then I will stop. Would that be okay? So I think these are very, very tough questions. And I have been thinking through that. If someone decides to practice their religion until they die, it's just like saying someone is living and they will live, they will be Christians, they'll be Muslims, and at some point they will die.
Yeah.
So they are practicing their religion until they die. So are these people wrong in practicing their religion and fasting until they die? And I think these are questions that as a society we must also ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Because I know as lawyers, the biggest question is, what do you charge Mackenzie with? Yeah? What do you charge him in court? Because it's not murder. He didn't kill anyone.
Because that's actually a very big question. Do you charge him under the Terrorism Act? Do you charge him under the
Criminal Penal Code?
Under the Criminal Penal Code? Do you charge him for contravening the Societies Act? It's a very difficult question. But I have one more around that, and it comes from where I was when this story broke. So I was out of the country. I was in Rwanda, as it so happens. In Rwanda, very, very tightly police their churches. So as these things were coming out, I was teaching a class, and the students, the trainees that I was teaching, were mocking me. They were like, you Kenyans are very strange. How would you allow for something like this to happen? And, he might have his sins, but this is why we like Kagame.
Yeah.
And that's a central question here. Because, I'm not going to comment about the nature of our leadership, but there have been some comparisons in terms of the style of William Ruto and perhaps the approach of Paul Kagame and the penchant now to be fairly overzealous in the application of laws that are deemed or that you deem not to like. This is also a core question. We have freedom of worship.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's time to review that law, that constitutional right, in light of this?
I think the right needs to remain. I think it's fundamental. And freedom of worship needs to be exercised to the fullest possible extent. But I also feel we definitely must regulate religious institutions. It shouldn't be possible for someone just to wake up one day and decide to lead followers on a suicide path. I think that shouldn't be possible. If we are even regulating the matatu sector, which is supposed to be the most chaotic, but you can't just wake up tomorrow morning and buy a matatu and put it on the road. You must belong to a certain circle, a certain structure where if your tires are not, properly, what are they? Threads.
Threads.
Someone will come and tell you, you're going to harm our passengers, You can't just have a driver who's a drunkard. Someone will come and tell you, we can't allow that. You're going to spoil our name. So for currently in Kenya, you just wake up one morning and you start a madrasa. No one knows what you're teaching those children. No one knows the syllabus that you're taking them through, whether it's a Sunday school or a church or a mosque. And we can't, I think, at this point in time, with this incident, we can't allow that to happen. We must regulate. It could be self-regulation. It could be regulation by the states, but there must be someone somewhere who monitors institutions, religious institutions. What are they teaching? Even if it's once in a month, you must file your reports to tell us what activities have been ongoing, to tell us how you are sourcing for funds. Where did you get, we see some religious leaders with mansions, huge, investments. Where did that money come from? We must make sure, there is no excessive use of religion for personal growth and stuff like that. So I strongly believe, and as a human rights advocate, in the freedom of religious worship, and I think we need to guard that because this is something we have been through as Muslims. When one mosque decides to be extreme, and then everyone pays for that, and I would guard, the state against repeating the same thing, because we have a religious leader or a church or a cult that has done this. It would be very wrong to demonize the entire religion, and we don't want to go that direction. But I fully support, from where I sit currently, regulation to be introduced. It could be as I said, it could be state-sponsored regulation, but we can't allow this current system to just proceed as is.
In light of what's happened and the sheer number of people who've died under the stewardship of Pastor Mackenzie, allegedly, because he hasn't yet, faced a full trial. There are some in society who are saying maybe it's time for these kinds of offenses and other kinds of really heinous capital offenses to reinstitute the death penalty. Again, another one of these moral sort of purgatories that we find ourselves in now. What's your view?
I think that, if you look at the history of the world, the death sentence has been applied in almost every jurisdiction. And the idea behind putting an end to life for whatever wrongs they have committed is still debatable in many societies, because then we say, at what point do you allow an individual redemption and an opportunity to mend their ways? Most of us, of course, were brought up with, religious backgrounds and all that, and we are always told that God forgives sin, and God gives people second chances and third chances and all that. So, and even as human rights practitioners, we know that there are sentences that equal death. Life imprisonment, for example. There's no much difference. But at least you give the individual an opportunity to express themselves, first of all, to the victims, to themselves, to, seek some form of redemption, as I said. So for me, I would say, I think for now, it wouldn't be appropriate to reintroduce the death sentence. In Kenya, we still have it, but it has never been applied for many years. But I think we can do with life imprisonment. And for me, that would be as good as death
sufficient
sentence.
Punishment.
Yes.
My final question to you comes from your own witnessing of what's happened on the ground, the people that you've seen, the children that were buried and, their bodies emaciated, and a meeting that many Kenyans wouldn't have the opportunity to get, but perhaps you in visiting court or what have you might have a chance to, is to stand face to face with Pastor Mackenzie. What would your question be to him?
My biggest question would be, why the children? Why not let the kids make up their own minds? Let them grow up. Let them decide what they want to do. I mean, for the adults, it's horrifying, but to imagine children, 10-year-olds, 12. This boy that we rescued, he said his brothers were so weak at one point, he had to go get dirty water from a muddy pool and brought them that water to drink.
As an instinct to save their lives.
Yes, as an instinct to save their lives. And then when the mom saw that, she came and thoroughly beat him up. Like, why are you doing that? You're not supposed to do that, and all that. And to imagine a young boy such as that would feel the pain of another child going through that starvation. but then you have these adults just allowing that to happen and being behind it. I think for me, that's the... I've like I said, I've done many cases. I've done these 2 children whose bodies were found in a vehicle in a police station in Athi River, decomposing bodies. But there's no one at fault there. Probably they locked themselves in the car in the police station. They didn't know how to come out. No one could see them and they died. People found out a month later or something like that. But to have individuals, particularly parents, I'm even imagining, how do you convince a mother to starve their children to death? I'm even thinking, if indeed those bodies of the ones we were told had died, had been killed, perhaps it could be that a mother maybe at some point felt, no, my child is going through too much. Let me just end this. End this for him or for her, Maybe, if that's the case. But if I was, to stand next to him, and I've been in court several times with him, but never got the chance to, that's for me, because today I'm still traumatized. And I remember some of those incidences, and I just need to take a moment to breathe. But to me, that would be the biggest question. Why the children?
Why indeed? Why indeed? It's really one that I think would resonate with a lot of Kenyans. And indeed a lot of people around the world who've been watching this in horror and asking themselves, surely, why? And what kind of society have we become? Indeed.
Because even in religion, Namu, we are told that kids are innocent. Probably they don't have sins. So if we are punishing the adults, you have to fast to feel the pain until you die. But these children, like a 4-month-old child, what wrong did they do for them to go through that? So those are... It's just horrifying to imagine what those 4, 5, 6 days these kids must have gone through.
And really a point for reflection for all of us across this country, that how could we let this happen? Shakahola is now one of those. I was just counting, and strangely and sadly, there are more people who have been found dead in Shakahola than the Garissa terrorist attack. And it's not to try and compare which tragedy is bigger than the other, but it's certainly a mark. It's left a mark on Kenya's record as a country that is a respecter of people's rights and really just a society that respects itself. It's one of those things that we should all really reflect on. But it's also been, as any big news event has been, a center or like a vacuum that's been sucking all of the truth out. And Tracy, I want to come to you now. There's been lots of fake news, heavy discussion, like I said, right? And by the way, if you have a question for Khalid, you should ask him. But let's start with the kinds of misinformation that have come out around the Shakahola tragedy.
Okay, so we came across 3 images placing Pastor Paul Mackenzie either at State House or worshipping with the First Lady Rachel Ruto or worshipping beside the president. So now these people are attempting to paint Mackenzie as a friend of the state, meaning, they're trying to push this narrative that nothing will happen to Mackenzie. According the captions in the posts are very sarcastic. So the first image is during the Thanksgiving ceremony that President Ruto held in State House on 25th January 2023. So now, normally, when what we've noticed with these Mackenzie pictures is that they pick out someone in the crowd who matches Mackenzie's build, Mackenzie's complexion, just to make it more believable. But in some of the images, you'll notice, yes, it matches Mackenzie's build, but Mackenzie's head looks a bit too big. Or maybe someone is slouching in their seat, and Mackenzie's face is facing forward. So the first one, the usual, invid, you reverse image search. Also, something else we've noticed with reverse image search now is that you especially with Google, you reverse image search and it generates the false claims. So what you get back are the false claims. So up there, what you can do is use keywords. Like in this case, if they're claiming Mackenzie was in State House during the Thanksgiving ceremony, just up there, type, because they'll generate something like worship or something, just clear that and type Mackenzie, or not necessarily Mackenzie, President Ruto, Thanksgiving ceremony, State House. All the pictures that were taken on that day will appear, and you'll be able to get the exact photo or the original copy of what has been doctored. So there are a couple. One is from the State House prayers, like I've said. Another one was actually from before the elections in July 2021, when President Ruto was worshipping, and there's a pastor there. I think his name is, let me get his name. His name is Eric Mwangi. His name is Eric Mwangi, so he matches Mackenzie's build, but it's not him. Also, the one placing him next to the First Lady was actually a picture from her and a prayer service she attended in Kajiado County. It's just another person from the crowd who also matches Mackenzie's build. So, I mean, you'd also be fooled to believe this is Mackenzie, right?
Because it's in a crowd.
It's in a crowd.
And I think for me, the bigger point here is how people who generate fake news also know how to manipulate context.
Yes.
Right? Because the president has been seen with religious leaders, he's unashamedly very pro, religion. Then you create the propaganda around that and then now start to generate the fake news.
Yes.
So I think we should be wary of that. And folks, you need to follow Tracy and Tom and all of the folks at Piga Firimbi for all of these very interesting fact checks and tidbits on how you're able to, to debunk fake news for yourself. Because these days, you can't rely just on Africa Uncensored. You kind of have to have the skill for yourself. Tracy, thanks a lot. Before I let you go, before we wind this up, do you have any questions for Hussein?
I don't have any questions. I just want you to ask him why the children, because that also bothered me a lot. Yeah.
No, thank you, Tracy. Thanks a lot for the work that you guys are doing on Piga Firimbi. Of course, more of that on pigafirimbi.africauncensored.online, or follow them on at Piga Firimbi on Twitter. We're on all the socials. We're all over the shop. We have a tradition here. It is, and it was a heavy interview, but nonetheless, traditions must be followed. And there's a colleague of mine behind, Louis, who's been very keenly listening. I'm sure you have, Louis, but also very keenly watching you. And this is our tradition. At every guest that comes here, we give them, and look, it's not literal. I've been complaining to him all morning about mine, but it's really just, something that captures the essence.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
This is nice.
Yeah, very nice. Something for you to hang up in your office, just to know that you are part of the big picture.
This is
at
cool.
the end of the season, we'll gather all of the pictures of the people who've been here, and then we send them out. But this is just a thank you for being on the big picture, Khalid.
Thank you so
we really
much.
Appreciate
I
it.
really appreciate this.
You keep coming. We'll have now full body drawings of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is excellent. This is excellent.
Yes,
I'll
say
keep
asante
this.
sana and asante for the work that you guys are doing at HAKI
Thank you so
Africa.
much. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode of The Big Picture. Of course, you can follow us on @africauncensored.net to find out when the next episode of The Big Picture is. We'll be doing this every week, though, so that's the clue. It's every week. So just set your reminders on our YouTube page. On Twitter, you'll get your updates. On TikTok, you can also follow us on Patreon if you want to become a patron of Africa Uncensored. Make a donation and help us, support us to do the important work that we're doing in fact-checking, investigations, and in bringing important guests like Khalid to this show. That's it for now. My name is John Allan Namu. We'll see you on the next episode of The Big Picture.